Hello there, I am late to the party because Eurovision has already passed, but I haven't seen it yet, so no Eurovision spoilers in the comments, please. I'm going to be seeing it probably in a couple of days with some friends. That's being arranged, but I thought while I have this enthusiasm to watch this year's Eurovision Song Contest, I would do this tag made by Bob the Bookerer. I'll leave it linked in the description below, which I thought was wonderful. And you should definitely check his video because he talks about like Eurovision more and explains it for people who might not know what it is and so on. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go straight into the wittily named Douze Prompts, starting with number 1, which I have here. National representative. A book or author that you think best represents your country or countries. This can be where you live, where you're from, and or where you have roots. If multiple countries apply, please feel free to use multiple examples here. So I love this question. I love how, diverse and inclusive and multiculturally it's been put. So I think that's very much in the spirit of Eurovision, and I thought I would respond in kind, talking about first the countries that I'm from because of where I've lived, and then the two that I'm from based on my parents. So for Japan, there's Ryunosuke Akutagawa. For England, Agatha Christie. For Peru, Cesar Vallejo. And for Ireland, Oscar Wilde. Number 2. Okay, number 2 and number 3 are based on the ranking system. So it's jury vote, a critically acclaimed book that you love, and public vote, a best-selling and popular book that you love. So for the first one, the jury vote, I thought it would be more interesting to go for a critically acclaimed book that I hate, or at least that I really didn't get along with and was very disappointed by, and that was Lincoln in the Bardo. Not only was this really critically acclaimed, but like it came recommended to me by people who I trust and whose opinions I feel like kind of chime with my own, and it was like, I don't know, everything about it seemed that it would fit my tastes. It's about the son of Abraham Lincoln who's stuck in this sort of Buddhist limbo called the Bardo, and it's all set in a graveyard, it's all told through dialogue, it's all these ghosts talking to each other, connecting like history with conversations and kind of surrealism and humor, and it all felt like exactly the kind of book that I would absolutely love, and I really didn't. It was so disappointing. It felt, I guess it reminded me of things that I did love, and I felt like it was maybe slightly derivative of those things, but yeah, Lincoln in the Bardo was a dud for me. Next one was, public vote. So I thought about this for a little bit, and eventually I settled on The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. Obviously one of the best-selling children's books of all time. It's got a special place in my heart. I'm sure it does for many people. It's just a perfect match of image and text, these vivid colors, this sort of surrealism of the different foods that the caterpillar's eating that of course caterpillars wouldn't really eat, and also the really beautiful pictures and the fun way that the pages are kind of shaped. It's a really tactile book, and it just completely engages your senses, as well as doing this really kind of simple but deep, I think, kind of storytelling, because it's I don't know, the sort of the way it builds tension in a really satisfying way, and then the sort of release of tensions through that metamorphosis at the end. It's just an absolutely perfect book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Number 4, based on something that lots of people say when they watch the Eurovision Song Contest for the first time, but Australia is not in Europe, and it has to be a book by an Australian author that you love. So for this one I picked Ghost Girls, which I read back in January, I think. This is a thriller about visa fraud. It's about, especially about students coming from East Asian countries who go to Australia to study English and so on, and the sort of the way that they are exploited and they end up working in the sex trade, and kind of some of the dodgy things that go on when people are, very vulnerable basically because of their immigration status. I think that even though it's a very specific kind of thriller in the sense that it's sort of the East Asian student visa fraud in Australia, I feel like it's really applicable to lots of people with immigrant status, or people who just, have noticed that there are gaps in the systems that people fall through a lot of the time, and it does a great job of charting all those little things, and it's just, a really fun thriller as well. Number 5, Junior Eurovision, a book aimed at children or young adults that you really like. So I didn't even know there was a Junior Eurovision, but I just did a children's book, but another one that I guess is a big thing from my childhood that I feel like not enough people know about is The Minpins by Roald Dahl. Obviously, Roald Dahl is, bulletproof. He's a wonderful children's writer. You can read any of his books, they're all great. But The Minpins is one that really captured my imagination and left such a strong impression on me when I was young. It's about a boy called Billy, I think, and he wants to go outside and have fun in the forest, but he has to stay home. And I think that feeling of being stuck at home is something that a lot of people will relate to in our modern world. But back to this story, like the devil appears, and the devil tells Billy that there's like these wild strawberries out in the forest, and he should go and eat the wild strawberries. And so he decides to sneak out of his house, break the rules, and go look for these strawberries. And of course things happen in the woods, and let's just say he doesn't find the strawberries. I think one of the reasons this stuck with me so much is because the illustrations were like, they're so impressionistic. It's like one of the few Roald Dahl books where they're not done by Quentin Blake, but by someone whose name I don't remember. Sort of really dull colors and like these kind of big like wide shots, I don't know what you call it, but like kind of landscapes, I guess, of forests and stuff, and like all these shadows and like suggestion, and it just really left a big impression on me. Number 6, Hardback Hallelujah. So obviously referencing the very famous Finnish win. I forget what year it was, but yeah, that was an odd year. But I have to pick an author whose work you love so much that you would always go out and get their books in hardback. So I had to think about this, like who do I really like who's like still releasing books, and that I would, want to go out to the shop and just buy those books the second that they were available. And I came up with Jokha Alharthi, the Omani writer, whose book Celestial Bodies is amazing and won the International Booker Prize, and that I read last year. I found on the internet an extract from one of her other books which had been translated into English called Bitter Oranges, and that was wonderful to read because it felt like the same voice as Celestial Bodies that I loved, but set in a totally like new setting. So instead of like in Oman and talking about Omani characters and culture, it's in Scotland, but in a dormitory, an international students' dormitory, and it's got that multicultural feeling of like lots of different characters all like kind of rubbing up against each other because they're all like in different dorms. It's got this wonderful sense of place and memory for like one's home country. It made me really excited to think that book hopefully is going to be fully translated into English one day and published. And I just want to read more about Jokha Alharthi. So whoever's in charge of like, getting her books translated and then like reprinted and into English and put on bookshelves and stuff, I'm sure it's a very long and arduous process, but please, I'm waiting. Number 7, Fairytale, another winner of a previous Eurovision. A book based on or influenced by myths and fairy tales. So for this, I thought Angela Carter, who I love, and the most obvious choice for her in fairy tales is probably The Bloody Chamber, which is a great book, and it's her retellings of fairy tales from a kind of like dark feminist slant, which sounds very like cliche nowadays, but she was doing it before it was cool, so I really recommend it to people. But actually, like, I think even more than that, I would recommend, I think it was just called Angela Carter's Book of Fairy Tales. And yeah, Virago published this collection of fairy tales from around the world, and Angela Carter edited them, and I think she wrote them out and put her own kind of spin on a few of them, but they're mostly just this great global collection of really fun stories that feel very modern and fresh. Like, just to give you a taster, the first one is an Inuit story about, it's only like, I think a few paragraphs or one paragraph long, about an Inuit woman who has a massive clitoris, and she's like the sort of the macho leader of her group, and the story is just talking about her swinging her clitoris around and putting all the men to shame and like hunting whales and just being like a badass. And that's basically like the whole story, but what else do you need, right? Number 8, 1944. So this was the time that Ukraine won with a quite political song about the deportation of the Tatars from the Crimea by the Soviet Union back in 1944. So the prompt is a historical novel that you love, and Bob the Bookerer added that it doesn't have to be about the Crimea, which in my brain translates as find a book about the Crimea. So as a matter of fact, I happen to have read Demons by Dostoevsky. I finished it in March, and that is, well, first of all, it's not neither about the Crimea nor is it a historical novel, so it really fails on all accounts. But I was thinking about it because first of all, it's really like a historical novel in that it's based on real things that happened, and the characters, although they're fictional and in a fictional town, are like based. A lot of them are based on real people and a real event that happened in Russian history. And also, the book is almost like haunted by the First Crimean War. Like, it's not explicitly talked about, but it's often mentioned, especially the siege at Sevastopol, where Russia lost. And, like, you know, like, there's this one character whose father died at Sevastopol, and they talk about it, like, in a sort of grand, glorious way. But we find out that he died of, like, a stomach infection or something like that, so it's quite, like, ridiculous. And I read about this on Wiki, and apparently, like, the First Crimean War, the fact that basically Russia lost to the Western powers. I forget which European countries they were, but yeah, Russia lost, and it was like a kind of a crisis, like an existential crisis for Russians, like, what's our place in the international order kind of thing. And that really, once you know that, it really explains a lot of the anxiety in this book and a lot of the kind of sense of social unease that's just going through the whole of this book, which is really wonderful. So yeah, the Crimea, honestly, I want to read more books about the Crimea. If anyone knows any good historical fiction about the Crimea, please let me know, because it's such an interesting place. For those who don't know, it's a peninsula in the Black Sea, which has been like the border between Europe and Asia since the time of the ancient Greeks. So really, it's like, you know, like all borderlands, it's diverse and multicultural, but also unfortunately plagued with lots of conflicts, and often very, you know, like violent conflicts. Number 9, Party for Everybody, the song which was done by the Russian grandmothers, which was really cheesy and funny, and that's what the prompt is: cheesy and funny book that always makes you laugh. The feeling I get from watching the Russian grandmothers is this sort of warm feeling of this is ridiculous and this is wholesome and this is fun, and I'm kind of laughing at it and with it and just enjoying myself at the same time. And I don't think I get that from books, like not that kind of warm laughter, if that makes sense. I do laugh at books, but usually it's for totally different reasons. But in keeping with the nationality of the grandmothers, I will mention Nikolai Gogol, who is a Russian writer from the Ukraine, and he's just really funny. He's one of my favorite writers. Especially there's this one story, what's it called? The tale of how Ivanovich quarreled with Ivan Nikiforovich. And it's just from the first paragraph making me smile, making me giggle, and the quarrel itself is absolutely amazing. I recommend it to anybody who wants a good laugh and who wants to get into Russian literature. I won't go into it because I don't want to spoil it, but suffice to say, it involves a goose. Number 10, Euphoria, a book that just makes you feel good. So since Euphoria was a Swedish winning song, I thought it would be a good time to mention the Minpins, created by Tove Jansson, who was Finnish, not Swedish, but from the Swedish-speaking minority of Finland. So she spoke and wrote her stories in the Swedish language. The Minpins are something which I absolutely love and that I want to explore more, because I've only read a few comics, and then last year I read my first book, The Minpins and the Great Flood, which I absolutely adored. It always is something that I can think about or go back to and skim through and just feel happy reading any of the words on the page. So that, I think, fits this prompt very well. Number 11, Waterloo, a classic book that is still relevant now and that you think will still be relevant for many years to come. So Waterloo is obviously the most famous song in Eurovision history. It's a single released by ABBA in the year 1974, and so I thought I would also pick a book from 1974. I had a quick look on the internet for bestsellers that were out in 1974, and the first one that caught my eye was Watership Down. Watership Down is something which I do think is still relevant today. Not in all ways. It's a book about rabbits who their homeland, their colony. What's a rabbit? Warren. Their warren is destroyed by humans, and they have to go find a new home and build a new home, and they have lots of adventures. So it's sort of like an Exodus refugee story about building a homeland thing. but they also have all these traditions and like their own mythology, which they bring with them, and which they, you know, like they have their own language as well, which you get to know as you read the book. And it's just so involving. It's a fantasy book, really. It's like a fantasy book about finding wonder in nature, and just a good adventure story as well, and taking strength from your traditions and your rabbit gods, whilst building like a new society and a new world to live in. So it's a great book. The things that aren't relevant today are like the gender things in that book are, let's just say, you know, rabbit society is pretty behind the curve. But apart from, you know, a few things, I honestly think it's a really great book that deserves to be read and reread for many years to come. And finally, number 12, we love you, Europe, which is a phrase I hope I'm going to hear many times to varying degrees of enthusiasm when I watch Eurovision in a few days. And the prompt is, a European author you think more people should check out, ideally an author who's less well known. So for this one, I would like to recommend Karen Michaelis, a Danish author who wrote The Dangerous Age, the only book of hers I've read, but it's so good. It's about a woman who gets a divorce and then goes off to live on an island, and it's an epistolary novel, one of my favorite epistolary novels, and I think I'm going to talk about it in another video, so I won't say much now. But I'd also like to recommend another favorite of mine, Heinrich von Kleist, a German writer from the Enlightenment period who wrote very anti-Enlightenment things, sort of against the grain of his time, which I think are wonderful. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed this video, whether you love Eurovision or don't know what it is and feel very confused after having watched this video. Either way, I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and that I'll see you again in the next one that I do. Auf Wiedersehen.